Aloha and good afternoon. My name is Jürgen Steinmetz, joining you from eTurbo News and Livestream.travel. I'm not in Honolulu, I'm actually in Cancun, Mexico. And Cancun is the place where the World Travel and Tourism Council is having their annual meeting. Yes, it is a physical meeting here in Cancun, and everyone is quite excited. I think it's the first physical meeting of any major global tourism entity. And so the hotel here I'm staying, the Moon Palace, is ready. I just went to backstage and see the rooms are ready. Everything is sanitized and gets sanitized every 5 minutes. So people are excited, and we don't know how many will attend eventually when it starts on Monday. But eTurbo News will be here, and we'll be reporting, and actually we'll be live streaming the event. So if you go to eTurbo News anytime Monday and Tuesday during daytime, Eastern US time or Midwest US time, you will most likely see a live stream with this event, and we'll repeat it for 24 hours after this. So if you missed anything, you can always look at it, or you can go back to livestream.travel anytime after this and look at this event. We're doing this in view of a partnership with the World Tourism Network. World Tourism Network is a global organization that just started in December, but has been around for 1 year now. And I think we at World Tourism Network were the first one talking about rebuilding travel. So our rebuilding travel group was started at ITB in Berlin in 2020 when there really wasn't any ITB, but we were in Berlin and we took the time and had our meeting that was planned at the Grand Hyatt Hotel with a handful of people, and this discussion now expanded to tourism professionals in 127 countries. Our focus, as you know, are really the medium to smaller guys, and we invite, of course, the big brand names to be part of us, and our focus is to get the medium and small guys in the industry a voice. And I think more and more destinations and organizations are recognizing it, thanks to Dr. Talib Rifai, former Secretary General for UNWTO as a co-chair, and Dr. Peter Tarlow, our security expert. We have been out there in more than 200 sessions. So if you wanted to know more about World Tourism Network, just go to WTN.travel, and you can join us. They are both complementary ways of joining us, and they are memberships that really are not expensive, but give you a very good value and access to a lot of these ongoing events. Today, there is a special occasion why we invited, and you see his picture of those of you who know Professor Geoffrey Lipman. He's joining us from Brussels. And Professor Lipman is a known person. He's not only leading our climate-friendly interest group, Green and Clean, I think we call it, for the World Tourism Network. He's been a mover and shaker and a player in the industry for so many years. I know Geoffrey for way more than 20 years now, and we've done a lot of things together. So I'm very privileged and very happy to have him. And Geoffrey was actually the person who started the World Travel and Tourism Council. It was his brainchild. And I think he was the first chairman or president or CEO. You tell us, Geoffrey. Good morning, good evening.
Good evening, Thomas. And it's just great to see you so active. I wasn't so pleased when you called me a known person, because I think that's what the FBI say when they're looking for a suspect somewhere. But I'm happy to have known you for 20 years, to have worked with you on many initiatives, and always to admired your love of the travel and tourism industry, which you truly have, and the supportive role that you've played for the industry, particularly in the last difficult 12 months, when you've created WTN and the rebuilding travel philosophy, and you've succeeded in developing, I think it's going to be a very important network. So I'm very happy to be with you today. I'm doubly happy to be there when you're at the WTTC. I did get an invitation, but I'm getting my second COVID vaccination next week, and I'm slightly older than you, so I'm in that dangerous group. So there's no traveling for me, and I'm looking forward to this particular meeting because Gloria Guevara, who's a good friend, is doing a great job of building the WTTC, and in a way which I think all of her predecessors, I was the first one, would truly admire. She's collaborating with the other big international organizations, maybe a little flaky with the UNWTO, but I certainly don't think that's the fault of Gloria. And I think she's getting the message out there, which was a message which was actually what we started with in 1990. It wasn't actually my brainchild. I have to make this clear. It was the brainchild of a group of people, American leaders, basically, predominantly in American Express, the then chairman, James Robinson, and a man who's now unfortunately dead, Tommaso Zanzotto, who you might remember, Italian tourism guy, and Lou Gerstner, who was, later went on to get heavily involved in that RJR Nabisco takeover exercise, and finally made it to be the chairman of IBM. And they had the idea in 1990, because American Express was a major organization in the corporate world outside travel, they understood how the rest of business was organizing itself. And they noticed that travel and tourism simply wasn't doing that. There were sectoral groups which were very powerful, like IATA. There was regional groups that you would find in Europe, like the European Travel Commission, and PATA in the Asia Pacific. But they were not collective in positioning the sector or in really calculating the economic and social impact of the totality of travel. The airlines pitched one story, the hotels pitched another story, and frankly, it was all played at a level below where the big business interests were. So American Express got 25 of their biggest customers, and it included some of the real leaders of the sector. Bob Crandall of American Airlines was heavily involved. Bill Marriott was heavily involved, late Bill Marriott. Bob Burns, who was so active in Hong Kong and built the Regent Group. And they gathered these people together. They took them to a couple of sort of hideaway meetings, and they agreed to create a cross-sector coalition at the leadership level, like the leading, a kind of World Economic Forum for travel and tourism. They advertised for a CEO, president, and I happened to be fortunately in the right place. Sir Colin Marshall of British Airways and Lim Ching Beng, the chairman of Singapore Airlines, who I know, asked that I go on a short list, or a long list as it was to begin with. And I got through a series of interviews and was offered the job. And at that stage, there was a concept. The task was, your job is to represent us. We're busily running our corporations. We simply don't want to give the time to something, building a new coalition, and we will hire you to do that. And they said, here's a blank sheet of paper, here's a budget. And it wasn't a huge budget in those days, to be very frank with you. And they said, write a mission statement and organize us. And working closely with American Express, very much guided by Jim Robinson at the time, we started to build a small organization. The first employee was a guy called Rick Miller. I think you might remember him. He was a genius on an Apple computer. And all of the statistics that you see now, they were kind of cobbled together in a small room. And we built a small staff, first in Brussels and then in London. And I was there for 10 years. We started to put out the serious economic reports. We had a report given to us by American Express from the Wharton Business School, which had done this satellite accounting of picking up the information on travel and tourism from the different places where it's scattered across the economy. I've said this to you before, I think, on one of your shows. You have to take the national accounts where tourism wasn't featured, and you have to put like a piece of plastic on top and tick everywhere where tourism is active. And then you lift the plastic, and now it's all done by computers, but you have a picture of the travel and tourism industry. And I know in 1992, I think we put out our first report, and I was going around saying, this is a big industry. It's directly and indirectly 10% of the global economy. And people used to laugh and say, this is nonsense. WTO had a working group designed to demonstrate that our figures were wrong. But 30 years later, you don't see a report that does not quote the WTTC figures. And that's indicative of I think, the vision of the founders of the organization, the fact that we stuck very carefully to our mission. I used to go around and people used to say, oh God, here's Mr. 10% again. Because that's what I used to say. I didn't say it's 10.375, I said it's 10% of the economy. It's 10% of the jobs. It's 10% of the capital investment. And that's significant. And it's bigger than any other industry. And we got some traction. And the organization built, the membership built. I think there were maybe 100 and odd when I left. And pivotally, and the thing I would really like to talk to you about today, after 1992, I went to the Rio Earth Summit. I found that there was another side to the positive side of travel and tourism. There's an impact side. Unfortunately, my chairman and my board at that time recognized this, and they agreed that we should develop some environment programs. So we then, instead of having one set of programs, we actually ended up basically with three. We had the economic impact studies and all of the stuff that goes with that, taxation impact and the other stuff. And then we had a group of environment programs. We set up an environment research center. We started the first certification program, Green Globe. And then we had an education framework where we started to talk to universities. And I did that for 10 years. I left in 2000 and went on to work with UNWTO, as sort of, as people used to say, you're a poacher turned gamekeeper. and I think during that period, you and I met, and we have since tried to continue this coalition building. As I said at the beginning, I'm full of admiration for what you're doing with WTN and your consistency and persistence and the way in which you're getting messaging out. And you've done something that I was never able to do. When I worked with Taleb Rifai for 10 years at UNWTO, I could never get him to do the things that you're getting him to do. So I congratulate you on that.
Well, he's retired, so that's all different.
Well, he's the most active retired person in the universe. He's on every one of your shows. And he's great. It's good to see him. But Thomas, what I did want to talk to you about, and I would like, a message to go out to the people watching. It's been an incredibly pivotal week, not just for travel and tourism, but I think for the whole world. And I'm talking about, first, the agreement that was carved between the new Secretary of State, Antony Blinken in the United States, and the government of China, and John Kerry, the climate representative of the United States, that the US and China would not only start to work together on climate resilience and fighting the climate crisis, but they would again take a leadership role. We've had 4 years of you know, my position on the last 4 years of the leadership of the US government. It's been catastrophic, it's been deceitful, it's been anti-everybody except a small group of people who had managed to get power, and they took us entirely in the wrong direction. The first thing that Donald Trump did, we announced with great glee, he was taking America out of the one multilateral agreement, the Paris Agreement, which America had helped build, and which is the one place where we have a sign of a future for humanity. And he took America out, the biggest economy, the biggest polluter. And for 4 years, we've had to listen to his nonsensical lies and climate denial. And within 3 months, President Biden has started America talking sense again, talking decency in international affairs, and most importantly, talking about leadership on carbon reduction and climate resilience. And the fact that they're doing it with China, the second biggest economy and the second biggest polluter, is incredibly significant, because we know the EU is way ahead on this track, has kept consistent, has committed to reduce its carbon by measurable levels between 2020 and 2050, to reduce it to what is called net zero, which means that you are not actually producing carbon, or you're not producing any positive elements of carbon. What you produce, you offset by promoting carbon reducing activities, particularly in developing countries. The EU is way ahead on that. Suddenly, America's back at the table, China's back at the table, and the last 2 days, your president, President Biden, has hosted a global leadership summit, which is designed to make everybody redouble their efforts. He's announced that the United States is redoubling its efforts and is reducing or is putting up new heavy reduction ambitions. And that sends wonderful messages to the world and gives us just a glimmer of hope for what we can do in the future. And what I'm interested now to see, and what I'm devoting my life to, is that we can develop what I call a climate-friendly travel system. Because there's a lot of opposition to the way that travel and tourism was developing, mass markets, a huge emphasis on growth and growth and growth, the emergence of over-tourism, massive cruise ships going into precious places like Venice. And I think if you listen to what President Biden and his team are arguing, it's not that we stop the growth and development, but that we reframe it in a way which is carbon neutral. And I believe it has to be carbon zero by 2050. I would go further. So I think you're there at a historic moment. And the last point I think I would make to you is that my friend Gloria Guevara, who I work closely with on these issues, has taken a very strong lead on this subject. She's marshaled her organization. She's restructured it to create a sustainable development focus group led by Daryl Wade from Intrepid. She has been very close to the head of the UN Climate Agency, Patricia Espinosa, because they were cabinet colleagues together in Mexico, where you are now, in the government of President Calderon. And she's worked with us at Sun X Malta in order to not only develop an annual report, a state of the sector report, which we will put out together in time for June the 5th, which is World Environment Day. We've just had Earth Day, but June the 5th will be World Environment Day. And we'll produce our second sort of analysis of where the sector is and where it needs to go. And she supported an initiative that we did in Malta to set up a registry in which companies and communities can actually file their carbon reduction and their sustainable development plans. And we've invested in this. We've set up a framework which fits with the UN Climate Agency framework. Patricia Espinosa has recently endorsed this as the Climate Center for Travel and Tourism for linking with the UN system. And there's nobody who's been more committed in this than Gloria. So it's great that you're there. And I'm sure during the coming days, there's going to be quite a lot of reference to this.
No, wonderful, Geoffrey. Thanks for laying this out on the table. Interesting history, interesting story. And we're all looking forward, I think, where our industry is heading to. And how do you see COVID, the entire COVID pandemic, play a role in this? Did it open opportunities in regards to rebuilding an industry? What has a focus on climate change and so forth?
You know, I'm reluctant to make this linkage of the benefits of COVID, because really COVID at the moment is still there. And in my view, it's still going to be there for a considerable amount of time. I've said on your programs before, I can't predict it. I don't think any of the people who come on and make predictions have any knowledge of how this virus works, of how it mutates, of how it attacks people, of which groups it attacks, of how it can be dormant and then suddenly flare up again. And I think, unfortunately, travel and tourism is kind of intimately involved with this process, because the virus travels when people travel. And therefore, all of the health requirements which are starting to emerge, I saw even this today, I got a piece telling me IATA and UNWTO will start to publish information on what countries and airlines are requiring from passenger. And that information changes. So you can leave Hawaii with certain regulations, and you can go to Mexico, and by the time you go home, the regulations can have changed because the public health situation in one or another of the places has changed, and it can change whilst you're there. So I think the COVID crisis has only done one thing, or maybe two things, in terms of the green stuff. It's made everything go slower. And when it goes slower, the second thing it's done is it's reduced the carbon output, because there's less planes flying, there's less hotels operating at a high occupancy, and so we're producing less carbon. Now, in relation to the first point, this sentiment of travelers, I think it's going to have a very major impact on business travel, because we are now communicating in ways that if we didn't have this, Zoom world, as I call it, we would miss everything that's going on. Now, you've just announced you're live streaming it. I can sit on my patio and I can watch what's happening. And if I want to participate, I can put a question and answer in. We're having a conference in a week's time, a youth conference, the Strong Earth Youth Summit. And we're expecting 500 young people from around the world. Well, if we'd have had to organize that event, some people would say, well, that's a MICE event. If we'd have had to organize that, young people would have had to pay the airfares. We would have had to pay our own airfares and for the facilities in the hotels. And everybody in the industry is hurting at the moment, everybody in industry generally. So the chances of that picking up rapidly, in my view, are very, very limited. Vacation travel will still continue. And I think there is a message that says to people, you can travel to better places. You don't have to go so quickly. You can go into the countryside. You can think more about your impact on local populations. And that sentiment, which has been there since 1992, has grown during this period. And I think you'll see these two things. But the carbon effect is very, very small. It's, you know, some people say that we've had a carbon output of under 10% during the COVID period. But in the big picture of things, and in terms of trying to reach a limit on carbon by 2050, so that the temperature of the world doesn't increase by more than 1.5 degrees, what's happened in the COVID period is absolutely nothing. We're on track to reach 3 degrees. And if we reach 3 degrees, and it's 30 years' time, it's the lifespan of one aircraft, you know, an aircraft type. So it's not unrealistic that we should be thinking about this. If it's 3 degrees, the sea levels are going to rise. So places like Miami are going to be flooded out completely, Honolulu. And the forest fires that we've seen burning in California and Australia and in the Siberian tundra, they're going to multiply dramatically. The storms that we've seen in the Caribbean, which wiped out whole island states, they're going to get worse and more of them. So from an actual carbon reduction point of view, the COVID crisis has made little impact. And the only way we can get a new balance, which is what we need, is there has to be very serious, active planning to reduce carbon by dramatic levels over the next 25 years. And it has to start now. You can't sort of say, well, we'll push it off 5 years. It has to start now. It means new aircraft types. It means new fuel, which doesn't produce the pollution. Big questions around building massive cruise liners with 10,000 people on them. Big questions. And it means hotels going to have to refurbish completely, have to start using solar power, wind power, in some cases nuclear power. And all of this is going to mean a big economic reshift, big economic boost if it's done properly. That's what President Biden is saying. We can boost the economy because for every 2 jobs, I read this somewhere recently, every 2 jobs that you're projected to get from using coal, there's 50 jobs in solar installation. And they're clean jobs. You don't have to go down the holes in the ground. It's engineers, it's technicians, it's cyber people. So there's a huge potential in it. And our sector, it isn't a question of whether it can change. It has to change and has to change, and it has to start right now. It has to stop being a voice for status quo, and we have to take a position of leadership, because if not, we'll be left behind, and the Greta Thunbergs of this world will say, don't use these polluting companies.
And Geoffrey, if you, I think one of the issues is here, people are not, for the most part, not really educated about climate change. Whenever there is a snowstorm, I hear the argument, you see, this is climate change. It's getting colder, it's not getting warmer. And and then you see, yesterday I watched a documentary, I think it was National Geographic's, on my flight over from Honolulu to Denver, and it was fascinating what you said, what 1 degree can do to places like the Great Barrier Reef, and not only to the Great Barrier Reef, what the Great Barrier Reef can do to the situation on land and everywhere else. So people, I don't think for the most part are educated about the consequences of climate change, and really
our generation not. Our generation, and I include you in our generation, Thomas, even though I know I can give you a few years. But the young people, they are educated. The young people have an Earth Day in school. They learn about these issues and they care about these issues. We've been running a diploma course for 45 graduate students from 30 countries around the world for the past 6 months in Malta, or virtually actually, but from Malta. And we don't have to teach them that climate change is real. They come knowing that. What we have to teach them is how the industry response has to fit with the rest of society's response. Tourism has a wonderful way of creating its own answers. And, you know, we're a special case. We need to do it this way. We're not a special case. If we don't fix this issue, we'll be consumed like everybody else. And we have to take care of those areas which we all know are dangerous. Aircraft produce a significant amount of the total travel and tourism industry pollution. The IATA position on dealing with this until now has been, I've referred to it as Neanderthal. The rest of the world says we have to have no carbon by 2050, pretty much. Even the American airlines have taken a lead on this, and now some European airlines. IATA position is by 2050, we will reduce our carbon to half of the levels we had in 2005. It's a nonsense position. It's a 2010 lobbying position. And they have to, it's no good saying we're the leaders and then demonstrating that you're the last people in the column.
Yeah. Geoffrey, go back a little bit to what you mentioned about business travel. Your assumption, leisure travel will come up after COVID with maybe, hopefully, with climate change adjustment, and business travel could be left behind. How can leisure travel function, for instance, in hotels, like the hotel I'm staying here, what looks like a good portion of the income of this hotel must be conventions because there's no convention center adjacent to the hotel. How will they be able to function and take care even of the expenses leisure travel would generate with just leisure travel be present in this tourism climate?
Well, they may not be able to. They have to adapt. You know, how did the dodo function when the people came to Mauritius in boats and started to eat it for lunch? If you don't find a way to adapt, you die. Big hotels will have to find ways to change their revenue cost mix. They'll have to find ways to, at the same time, to reduce their energy requirements. They'll have to move to green energy, and they'll have to find a mix where there's an appeal more to leisure travelers. Maybe the rates will have to go up for leisure travelers. You know, if there's no business component there or limited business component, you either have to substitute that with something from the leisure component, or you have to reduce your capacity, you have to reduce your labor force. All of these things sustain business. And governments should find ways to help them make this transformation. You know, there's plenty, they need to find creative ways. You and I both know, I'll give you a perfect example. I wrote a letter last week to Boris Johnson. I know he won't read my letters, if he can read. I wrote a letter to Boris Johnson, and in one page, and I said, here's a chance for you to do something which is really good for the travel and tourism industry. You're hosting the COP meeting at the end of the year. Why don't you announce that you're taking the airport passenger duty which produces £4 billion a year to the UK government, and you're making it into a fund to help small businesses make the transformation to climate-friendly travel. And then I did something else. I started a small petition. You can do that online, anybody. You could start a petition. Well, you have to be a UK citizen to do that. But I started a petition that basically said, why don't you do this? Now, if you think about that, that doesn't cost the UK one penny. They get this money from travelers. They've been doing it since 1994. It started off with a relatively small 300 million a year. Now they get 4 billion pounds a year, and it sits inside the Treasury. So they could take it without any cost to the UK, and they could help for this transformation. I think banks could help by giving, really generous loan capacity. At the current moment, interest on loans is pretty much zilch. So they could try to find something that gives a 5-year window. And then, people may have to pay more. I keep coming back to this. It sounds like an anathema, but you can't keep driving the price down and down and down. Eventually, you have to pay for what it costs.
Yeah, and that's how the free market works, I guess. So. But
well, with the Justice Department behind it, yeah.
No, Geoffrey, really, really good discussion, and I think a lot of the people here in Cancun and those that are excited to listen to the WTTC presentations on Monday and Tuesday would be interested in listen to this one before it all starts. And I don't know if you want to say anything else before WTTC starts. We're going to get this out here and show it to as many people as we can.
Well, no, first of all, I do appreciate this exchange with you. Always appreciate the opportunity to do things with you. I think we are going to have a more I know this was very in-depth, Thomas, but we're going to have an even more in-depth discussion with Vijay Punasamy, another one of your contributors and fans of what you're doing. I think we're planning to try to do this on the 4th of next month, and to talk about this whole US-China leadership thing and the shift of the Biden government to take a proactive, positive role in dealing with the climate crisis as maybe being the last real chance for humanity. I've been following this stuff for 30 years, since I started with WTTC and since I became friends with Maurice Strong in Rio, the father of sustainable development. And he was pointing out in 1972 with the first Earth Summit, the climate crisis is the big issue. You can't produce nice ads to turn the planet from being inhospitable. The marketing people can't do that. This is a serious problem, and we have to transform. And the US and China and the EU are forging a common position, but that common position will require serious redistribution of the way that costs are incurred away from fossil fuel. I mean, it's a crazy world, Thomas. Governments are still subsidizing coal. Governments are still subsidizing oil exploration. And they know this will kill you. And this model, which is kind of based on what happened with cigarettes, yes, well, you can still kill yourself, but we'll put a warning notice on the package. It's crazy.
Right.
They have to take really strong, big steps. And thank goodness WTTC is an organization. It's not the only one, but it happens to be well positioned now to be able to sort of give some leadership in this direction. And some of it will be hard changes that many of the members say we can't make that shift. The hotel you're in at the moment, if it's really going to make a shift, it's going to have to say, if we don't use the current fuel, what fuel can we use? What does it cost us? They have to plan that. And young people, that's my last message. The young people, my kids, I have grandkids now, and they're smart on these issues. They just say, change the way you're doing business. That's what WTTC members have to do.
So it's all about leadership. And well, Geoffrey, it was really nice having you here this Saturday, and hope we can talk again maybe right after the WTTC conference, and you can give us your perspective on what is happening. And anytime
I'll be watching your live stream. I think it's great that you're putting it out. I'm really sorry not to be there with you. We've had so many good dinners together at these various events, but I'm not feeling too bad about being home, to be honest.
No, you got a nice home, and and dinners here, you know, yes, they're free. It's all inclusive. So, you know, it's another dinner, I guess. But we're going to have a dinner maybe in Brussels again at a real place when COVID cools down and we both have the vaccine.
I fear for you in an all-inclusive resort, Thomas, because I've had so many good meals with you. I know you like your food.
All right. Well, I'm trying to cut down. So, but they have a gym here too, so that's a good part. Let's see. All right, Geoffrey, you take care. And
you too, and really good. And thank you so much for this.
All right. Okay. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.